He didn't take her in because he wanted to. He did it because he couldn't stand the thought of leaving her out there, alone, cold, and hopeless. That night, he thought he was saving her life, but he had no idea. She'd be the one saving his. He took her in out of pity, but she changed his whole life. The wind that night sounded like a cry from the hills, long, mournful, and full of memory. Snow blanketed the ground like a sheet of dirty ash, reflecting the dead light of the moon. There were no stars, no voices, no footsteps, only the dry rustle of naked trees and the crack of old wooden boards from a forgotten house in the middle of nowhere. Inside, sitting before a small, tired fire, Thomas Hale stared at the flames as if he were guarding an enemy. His hollow eyes, surrounded by wrinkles and silence, moved slowly, searching for some trace of life in the fire. But all he saw was her shadow, the woman the fire had taken 3 winters ago. The chair across from him still sat there. Her shawl still hung on the same nail, as if she might return to claim it one day. But he knew better. Deep down he knew no one was coming back. Thomas barely spoke, and even the sound of his own voice annoyed him. Only the popping of the wood kept him company, small sounds that sometimes felt like breathing. It was the kind of loneliness that didn't scream, it weighed. The kind of silence the mind eventually starts to call home. Outside, the wind howled again, pushing against the door, flinging snowflakes like handfuls of flour. Thomas raised his eyes instinctively. Something about the sound was different, an uneven rhythm, as if the wind itself were struggling to breathe. He stood still for a few seconds, listening, then muttered something under his breath and grabbed the heavy coat hanging on the wall. When he opened the door, the cold stormed into the room, nearly killing the flame in the fireplace. Beyond the doorway, only darkness. But something moved. A shape or someone tried to walk down the icy dirt road. Thomas took the lantern and raised it, shielding the flame with his calloused hand. The light revealed a staggering silhouette, small, trembling, draped in dark fabric. It was a woman, or what was left of one. She stumbled forward, her face hidden, bare feet sinking into frozen mud. She fought the wind, but every step bent her lower, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. Thomas held his breath. For a moment he thought about shutting the door. It wasn't his problem. Nothing was anymore. He had learned long ago that helping people only left him emptier in the end. And yet, something in the way she fell to her knees made him hesitate. The lantern shook in his hand. The flame trembled as if it too were afraid. He took 2 steps forward. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice rough. The woman raised her head with difficulty. Her eyes, huge and tired, caught the lantern light. They didn't speak, but they asked for everything. Thomas looked up at the sky, then at the road, and then at her again. The cold bit his face, but what really hurt was the ache in his chest, that old weight he thought he had buried with his wife. It was pity and fear of feeling pity again. "Damn it," he muttered. He exhaled sharply and trudged toward her. When he reached her, he saw that the dark fabric was a torn cloak, soaked through with snow. Dried blood stained the cloth near her shoulder. Her face was pale, her lips blue, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. He hesitated again, glancing down the empty road. Maybe he could still pretend he hadn't seen her. But when she tried to stand and collapsed again, the sound she made, a small broken cry, half human, half child, cut through him like a blade. Thomas sighed deeply, set the lantern down, and lifted her into his arms. She was far too light, as if the wind could have carried her away. Her skin was cold as stone, and still she was breathing. He walked back inside, heavy boots stomping against the floor, and kicked the door shut. The weak firelight flickered across her frozen body. He laid her down on the rug near the hearth and stood there, not knowing what to do. For a long moment he just watched. Her face was young, but her expression, even unconscious, carried something ancient, a kind of pain he recognized. "You picked the wrong house, girl," he muttered, pulling off his gloves. He grabbed a thick blanket and wrapped it around her carefully, pretending not to care too much. His mind and instincts fought each other. Everything in him said this was a mistake, that it was safer to stay numb. But some buried part of him, the part that still remembered warmth, couldn't let her die there. The fire crackled. Little by little, her breathing grew steadier. He listened to the sound of air moving in and out, fragile but real. For a moment, that sound comforted him. It reminded him of life. It reminded him of her. Thomas sat in silence, staring. The lantern on the table cast long shadows across the cabin walls. The woman stirred, a faint murmur escaping her lips. He leaned closer to hear. Please," she whispered. He frowned. He couldn't tell if she was asking for help or forgiveness. Maybe both. After a while, her eyes fluttered open. The firelight made them glimmer, but confusion clouded them. Fear, shame, and something deeper, as if she'd forgotten what kindness looked like. Thomas shifted awkwardly. "It's all right," he said quietly, though he didn't sound sure. She blinked, trying to understand where she was. Then, in a voice barely audible, "Thank you." Those two words hit him harder than he expected. Simple, but painful. He hadn't heard anyone thank him in so long that he didn't know what to do. He turned away, pretending to tend the fire. "Just warm up," he muttered. "Don't want anyone dying in here." She closed her eyes again, exhausted. He stood by the fire, watching the flames dance. Inside, something began to move, like the thawing of an old frozen lake. And that scared him more than any storm could. Hours passed. The woman slept. Outside, the snow kept falling, slow and soundless. Thomas sat at the table, staring at the lantern. His heart beat heavy, as if it had forgotten how to keep rhythm. In another life, he might have offered her tea, a better blanket, maybe even a smile. But now every act of kindness felt dangerous, as if any flicker of humanity might reignite a fire he'd fought years to smother. He rose and looked at her again. Her face seemed calmer now. Her lips no longer blue, and somehow just seeing her breathe filled the cabin with something it hadn't had in years. Presence. Then he heard it, a faint, fragile sound. She was crying in her sleep. Thomas turned away, but the sound lingered. Every soft sob seemed to echo inside him. The man who believed he had nothing left to feel realized that compassion still lived somewhere deep inside. And worse, it still hurt. The fireplace popped, tossing a spark onto the floor. He crushed it under his boot and muttered to himself, trying to drown the weight of his thoughts. Maybe she'll leave tomorrow, he told himself. Maybe she won't even make it through the night. But for the first time in years, Thomas didn't want morning to come. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside that cabin, something new had begun. A faint warmth that came from neither fire nor wood. It was weak, unsettling, and dangerous, but alive. He looked at her one more time, small, still, breathing. And the same thought haunted him again. Why me? The silence answered. Because he still hadn't learned how to live without feeling, and the winter that seemed eternal had just cracked open. Morning came slow. The first light struggled to break through the gray clouds, and the frost on the window blurred everything beyond it, as if the world itself didn't want to be seen. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Thomas stood by the stove, pouring boiling water into a dented metal cup. The smell of smoke and pine filled the room. He turned, half expecting to find the woman still asleep on the rug. But she was sitting up now, staring quietly into the fire, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, yet in the soft light she didn't look broken anymore. Just tired, alive. Thomas cleared his throat. "You're awake." She looked up slowly, as if pulled from somewhere far away. Her eyes, still a little dazed, flicked between him and the cup in his hands. "I made some tea," he said. "It's not good, but it's warm." She hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling against the metal. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile but not weak. "Thank you," she whispered again. He nodded, uneasy. Silence grew between them like frost spreading across glass. Outside, the storm had calmed, but inside, a different storm was beginning. Thomas wanted to ask, "Who are you? What happened? Why were you out there alone?" But he didn't. He'd lived long enough to know that some questions are better left unanswered. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. There was something about her, a quietness that wasn't just fear, but the weight of someone carrying too many ghosts. "What's your name?" he finally asked. She blinked, her gaze lost in the steam rising from her cup. "Evelyn," she said softly. Then, almost as an afterthought, "At least that's what they used to call me." Thomas frowned. "Used to?" She didn't answer, just stared at the fire again, her expression unreadable. Days passed. She stayed. At first, Thomas told himself it was temporary, just until she got her strength back. He kept his distance, doing chores outside, chopping wood, tending the small patch of livestock that had somehow survived the winter. But every night when he came back, she was there, by the fire mending torn fabric or quietly reading from an old Bible that had belonged to his wife. The sound of her voice, soft, low, reciting verses to herself, filled the cabin with something he hadn't realized he missed. Life. Sometimes she hummed old songs he vaguely remembered from years before, songs his wife used to sing while folding laundry or tending the garden. It was torture and comfort at the same time.